All right, so what is Rehab Pilates? It's a therapeutic exercise tool that we use to address biomechanical compensatory patterns and dysfunctional movement patterns. So basically we use Rehab Pilates and the principles to break down the basic movement patterns of your body. And then we use those same principles to build you back up again, which is actually really cool and a lot of fun. From a rehab perspective, if you're not doing the movement or the exercise well, then you're not really doing it, okay? So we're gonna strive for good quality movement rather than quantity of movement or using a lot of resistance, okay? Once you're doing it well, then you can gradually make it a little bit harder, a little more complicated. You can add other elements to it, add some more resistance or load to make it more challenging. But in the beginning, we're striving for really, really good quality movement, okay? Now, what are some of the indications that you're doing it well? You have no pain, you have ease of movement, you can breathe easily, there's no guarding or tension in other areas of your body, and your post-workout soreness is normal. So we'll talk in a little more depth about pain, both during your workout and afterwards. We'll get into that in a little more depth later on. I want to give you an example of something that I would see in the clinic on a regular, I see it all the time. So a person comes in and they're having lower back and hip pain. It turns out they have an unstable pelvis, or another way to say that would be their SI joint keeps going out of alignment. It's really, really common, happens for lots of different reasons. For this example, I'm going to keep it really simple, okay? So let's say this person's right side of their pelvis is stuck in a posterior rotation. So this would be my pelvis, right? So this is my right side. It's stuck in a posterior rotation like that, okay? So I could use something called muscle energy technique. I can put their hip back into place and send them on their way. But I know that they're just gonna be back probably pretty soon with the exact same problem because I didn't address the driver of the dysfunction. So what I would do is do a little more assessment with this person. So I'd have them lay face down and extend their hip for me. So hip extension is taking the leg back, okay? That's hip extension. So I'd have them lay down and do that for me. And let's say immediately I can see that they're primarily using their hamstring and not their glute max, okay? So just in case you don't know, the hamstring is down here, back of the leg. This is the glute max, okay? So when the hip extends, it should be primarily the glute max, or that should be the first thing that fires, and then the hamstring should also turn on, okay? So in this person's case, that's not happening. They have a reverse firing pattern of their hip. So we need to address that. That's probably the driver of this problem. And if we don't fix it, their pelvis is just going to keep going out of alignment, right? So there's a couple ways that this could be addressed. One of them could be some stretching of the hamstring, some self-massage. You could use a tennis ball, you could use a foam roller. You want to basically just kind of calm that hamstring down, and then you want to activate the glute max to get it turning on, to help make that neural connection with that muscle. And then you want to practice doing your hip extensions correctly. So I would get the person, we would do the release work and the activation, and then I would get them to practice doing that movement pattern well. We need to repeat that in their nervous system enough times that it sticks. And then they probably need to work on it at home as well, okay? So a good analogy that I learned from one of my instructors was, picture a field of very tall grass, and there's a well-worn pathway right down the middle. That's the easiest way to get from point A to point B. Now, all of the movements and patterns in your body are synapses in your brain between different cells. So they're pathways from path A to path B, and that's how you flex your bicep or extend your hip or, you know, move your head, whatever it is. So your body will always take the path of least resistance, but if that pathway is dysfunctional and it's causing problems, we want to fix that. So with this, you know, field of tall grass, just because there's a pathway right down the middle. It doesn't mean you have to take that pathway. You can still go out into the grass and get from point A to point B a different way, but you're going to have to do it over and over and over and over, and eventually you will have a new well-worn pathway, and that will be your new path of least resistance and the easiest way for you to get from point A to point B. Now, this is literally how we correct dysfunctional firing patterns using Rehab Pilates, if that makes sense. Okay? Now, getting back to the reverse firing pattern of the hip, correcting that early enough could actually be the difference between a healthy hip that this person's able to use well into their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, who knows, or if it's not corrected, that can actually be one of the things that contributes to osteoarthritis of the hip. So if the hamstring is overactive, it can drive the head of the femur anteriorly in the socket. So if you picture, this is your femur, your thigh bone. This is the ball of the ball and socket joint, and this is your acetabulum, so it's a ball and socket joint. If the hamstring is overactive, it's going to drive that head anteriorly in the socket, and then it rubs. Every time you move, it rubs on that anterior side of the acetabulum. So over time, that can wear down the cartilage, and then you've got osteoarthritis of the hip. So not all dysfunctional movement patterns are going to cause pain or cause dysfunction. Not all of them need to be fixed. People typically come in to see me because they're in pain or they're uncomfortable. And that's when we find these patterns and we figure them out, okay? So something like a Rehab Pilates program, I think it can be used both to fix problems, but also as a certain level of prevention, because you're activating different muscles in different ways, and you're trying to isolate them and do it well, and isolate very specific movement patterns. So sometimes there's a lot of value in that you're not even realizing that you're getting, which is really cool. Now another common misconception around rehab exercise in general, not just Pilates, people will think that the target muscle is weak. So, for example, they'll come in and say, well, I have a weak core. And we'll do some assessment and some testing, and a lot of the time it turns out your core muscles aren't actually weak, or your glutes aren't weak. It's not like there's less muscle fibers there or that they've degenerated, unless you've been immobilized for a period of time, like being in a cast or sling, something like that. It's actually just a bad neural connection. So we need to reestablish that good movement pattern and reestablish how you get from point A to point B, and then all of a sudden that person doesn't have any trouble turning on their core anymore. Their back pain goes away, or their hip pain, or their shoulder pain, or whatever it was. So from my perspective, I've always found the way the body moves and putting all of these things together, figuring it out, to be very, very interesting. And I hope that you enjoy this, learning about this as much as I enjoy teaching it.